Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show's been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com. Today I'm in reflective mode. I'm thinking about personality. I'm thinking about who you are, how you get to know who you are and how you convey that in an artistic style or an artistic practice or creativity at large. This is the Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? My name is Ben Talon. I am the host of the Creative Condition podcast, the founder of the Creative Condition, an artist, writer and creativity coach, helping people to get to where they need to go with their creativity, to get back on that optimal path, to understand themselves and to channel that into their creative work. It's fulfilling stuff. I love all of it. I'm creativity obsessed. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that by now. Is the bedrock in my life. It is my coping mechanism when things feel heavy, as they do this morning. Might get into that in a moment. And a topic that's come up on my radar today is identity, personality, self, trusting that, ways it manifests, specifically what I wanted to look at in this episode, because I've just had a very invigorating conversation with Danny Allison, fellow illustrator, and also a very talented photographer, close friend of mine. We go back to my earliest formative days. We met on our illustration degree at UCLan in Preston, University of Central Lancashire. I think it's just switched to University of Lancashire actually recently. But anyway, before we get into that, quick thank you again to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X, without whom this podcast would not exist. They helped me get it off the ground. They're a great illustration agency representing illustrators and animators across the planet, some of the world's best, working with all the top brands and agencies and companies. And they do great work for the creative industries across IP, defending against the likes of AI, and they've been, campaigners around all that stuff. I believe the government here in the UK is about to do a U-turn on legislation with AI harvesting copyrighted work. Shame it took this long, but progress is progress to be celebrated, I suppose. So we'll take it. And I'd also like to shout out for the Ukrainian Institute, supporting the Ukrainian creative community during this horrific time of war. Do what you can to support those guys. You could share some work. You go on the website, you could share some work of an artist or a designer that you like. Their mission is to help connect them with the broader world, because things are very tough in Ukraine. It's a country at war and it's heartbreaking to see, but the bravery and the resilience and the defiance in continuing to be creative and celebrate creativity is nothing short of empowering and inspiring. So do your bit. See if you can share something. One better, if you can commission or support them in another way, then that's also awesome. So please do that. So today's show, let's get into it. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode with Richard Wiggins and Simon Wright from All Flows, MK Geek Night coming out of Milton Keynes, and also Pooleyville, their agency. Great guys. We talked about the importance of local scenes and community and connection and tribes and all that lovely stuff. It was Murugaya, a multiple-time guest on this show, who put me in touch with Richard, said, I think Ben would be a great speaker. Ben, I think you should meet Richard Wiggins. He does some great stuff. And Richard booked me to come and speak at the MK Geek Night. Such a great broad range of speakers right across all different disciplines, not just in the arts either, science and business and all sorts. A really imaginative, forward-thinking night that I highly suggest. And All Flows, their festival, which is coming up, I think it's the 13th to the 15th of May, 2026. So if you fancy that, get yourself to Milton Keynes. It's a really interesting city, and their range of speakers this year is phenomenal. So check them out, Google them, find them. So personality, right? So I've come off a very invigorating conversation, as I mentioned, with a long-time friend, Danny Allison. We are putting together a series of radio shows. All will be revealed it's not on the Creative Condition. It's another platform. We will tell you more about that when we've got the shows in the bag, and we're going to start pushing the show. But it's a great platform. Excited about it. And we are looking at the opportunities and problems with being creative in the information age. So we get deep on a lot of topics, and the topic we've just finished having a conversation about is knowing yourself. Now, Danny helped me greatly from the point I met him on my second year of a degree studying illustration. Danny was in starting his third year when I was on my second year, and we got put in the same studio. They put us all together, which was amazing to see the third years and their more advanced work, and in particular to encounter the work of Jay Taylor and Danny Allison, whose work really spoke to me because of its personality, and it was brilliant. It had a point of view, it had soul, it was handmade, it was saying something, it had a real stance, and I wanted that, and I didn't have it at that time. I was playing around with collage, which I wasn't really up to at that point. I was drawing a little bit, but I'd lost my way a little bit with my drawing. I'd been influenced too much by the art of the time that I was seeing in Dazed and Confused and The Guardian and other places that were quite prolific in their commissioning of illustration. So seeing these guys really put a rocket under me, I wanted to find my version of this, and it wouldn't be until after university, so 2 years on from that for me, that I started to find the threads of the artistic personality and style that captured who I was as a human being. And I attribute a lot of that to Danny Allison, because we ended up sharing a studio together after I graduated. Now, the first 6 months for me, you might have heard me say before, if you're a long-term listener to the show, if you've read my book, Champagne and Wax Crayons, was very challenging. It was very tough. I couldn't find my flow. I struggled with the cut-off of tutorial input and no studio space. I was suddenly in a bedroom on a B&Q garden table. For non-UK listeners, B&Q is a DIY company here in the UK. So I had a plastic green garden table. A couple of pictures up, Damon Albarn on the wall, creative sage for me, and away I went. And the work, while there were a couple of okay pieces that emerged from that time, really most of it was terrible. I worked full-time at a bookstore, Waterstones here in the UK, which was a lovely job. So I had my money covered, and the idea was that I would build a portfolio in that time, but I found it so hard for the aforementioned reasons. When it eventually started to happen for me, it was because I tapped into a whole deeper layer of self-awareness and personality and managed to package it into a style that was the embryonic version of the style that you see today for me. This line-drawn, loose, organic, playful, raw style. And that was utterly a reflection of who I am, where I'm from. It had a sense of place in it, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it was Danny who turned around and said to me, look, this collage stuff that you're doing, it's not great. There's loads of better collage artists out there. When did you stop drawing? Because your drawing was second to none. So this wasn't any kind of takedown. I was so appreciative of Danny's honesty. I've always been a sponge for criticism. I actively seek constructive criticism for anything I'm doing, anything I'm trying to learn, because I think it's how you grow. It's how you get better. And Danny's honesty and willingness to share that with me was a turning point. So I stopped making the bad parody work, and I stripped it all back. And I went back to this loose, living line drawing with minimal colour, sparse, one spot of colour, one colour usually, because I was terrified of colour. I didn't have the technical attributes to do it, to use Photoshop and to use it effectively. So I had to be very considered with the colours that I chose. And Danny's comment kick-started something really important, because this was at a time when we were incubated in a studio shared with, I think, three other people, myself, Danny, and three others who were at the very start of their creative careers too. So it was a very exciting time. But Danny and I had a workspace next to each other, only one partition wall dividing us, which went about shoulder height. So we'd constantly be meerkatting over the wall at each other's work and just sharing stories. And I would be so inspired by seeing him work for real-world clients when I didn't have any. But here I was at the start of tapping back into this real sense of personality and a style. And it came together really quick, the first portfolio off the back of that conversation. But it was an exciting time. So I wanted to talk about the importance of self-awareness and trusting who you are and working with where you're from and using your humour and your language and your tone of voice and informing your presentation and your communications and your ideas with all of that. Because the sooner you do that and the sooner you hit upon something that's real with who you are and what you're setting out to do, I think the sooner you land with the right tribes, put yourself in front of the right potential enablers, the clients and the people who can facilitate more development for you. Because it's not just clients, it's about the people you surround you with, your peers, your friends. If you choose the right ones and you are open and honest about who you are and you wear that, whether that's painfully shy and introverted and you do it in a very quiet manner that works for you, or whether you are extroverted and confident and you want to be around other big personalities, then I think that it all works and it all helps to get you there. Now at this time I'd built this crummy website using Dreamweaver, and I'd collapsed it the first time by losing a little bit of code, utterly heartbreaking. I'd spent weeks while I was out of work and signing on for job seekers allowance here in the UK, which was a benefit. And a crushing moment eventually got me back on the horse, and I made this little website, and there it was. I could say I'm an illustrator. I've got a website now, and it was pen and ink at the time, like pen and ink instead of Ben Talon. Hate it looking back. Not hate it, but I chuckle at it. It's very tacky, I think, very cheesy. And what I started to do by spending time with Danny was, really double down on who I knew I was. Like I was already quite confident in who I was, thanks to some very beneficial friendships on that level. But by being in that room with Danny, a fellow artist who was making work according to who he was and what he cared about, just inspired me so much. And that's what we did. We shared what we were into. We shared articles that we came across that amused us in some way or upset us or invigorated us. We had music on in the studio all the time. We were in there long hours, 16-hour days usually, because I'd quit my job at Preston City Council to try and go full time. I knew it wouldn't stick in that first run unless something happened that was very, fortunate and out of my hands. Beyond my plans, but didn't happen. But it was a really important time nonetheless to play and to be silly and to be daft and to laugh with each other. And it informed everything. It informed the ideas for the work I made, the way I executed that work. So I wanted to just talk about ways that you can manifest who you are in the work. First of all, you have to truly embrace who you are. I think you have to lean into all the good, the bad, and the weird about where you're from, about the cultures you've existed in, about your motivations and your values in your life. And if you can get yourself to a place where you're honest and open about that and you share it in a way that works for you, it opens doors and it attracts the right people in. I'm not going to say like for like, because like-minded people only go a certain distance in terms of their worth. I think we have to mix with others and difference to truly get a good panorama of references about who we are and see how we fit in all of that. But at that time, building a website, because thanks to Danny and this kind of extra support and confidence in being who I was writing copy that was irreverent. I was using an informal language and letting that go. I was posting unfinished work with some aspects of bad drawing, if not all bad drawing, because it was so early in my career. But I had a point of view, and there's something about this black and white and sparse use of colour that landed with people, and much did the hand lettering. And when I look back, this is something that came up in my chat with Danny. I wanted to talk about place, because being from Keighley, a sort of working class mill town, a lot of roughness there. It's got its problems like any small town. Also got a lot going for it. Got great taste in music as a local culture. A lot of creative people, even if they would never admit to you that they can be or are creative. So many of them. All those eccentrics are incredibly creative, but sadly for a lot of them, tragically in some cases, that transformed into a need for escape, because the lives they were living, that, to use Danny's term, they had been railroaded for them, fed into this machine where, here's what you should do because you're all right at that. No one asks you whether you give a monkeys about it, whether you're interested or passionate about it in any way. So these people ended up in jobs that would dispirit and bring them down. But the sense of place that I have from Keighley, for me as a person, I'm completely raw and rough around the edges, and I've said it many times before, but if it wasn't for that character trait, I wouldn't have tapped into the drawing that I do today, because that scruffy roughness is exactly a byproduct of the environment I grew up in, and therefore the humour that I came to appreciate, the local barbs of people who would give you absolute shit but then have an arm around you telling you how much they loved you. That's very Keighley, a very northern town. Maybe it's a slightly masculine trait, I don't know. I know Ricky Gervais talks about this on his stand-up, about how we sort of offend and swear at one another as in terms of endearment, and there was always a lot of that. And then language, so the way that I will write an email right through to a book or even a message, I write it as me, and I often don't filter or censor that, even with clients, because I think there's something endearing about being real, and people pick up on certain things, and I've always found that to be the case. So let that go too, and let it happen in your communications. Don't be afraid to have a laugh with the client if you see an opportunity to be funny, for example. We're not talking stand-up here, we're not talking in the middle of a lecture, we're just talking about a footnote in an email, thought you might like this type of energy. I used to do that all the time and became actually still friends with some of those early art directors in my career. So that's one thing. Personality of place and, humour, language, tone. Again, tone of voice. That could be everything from how you present the work on a website or in a portfolio as to how you execute the work. I think in the creative process, all of this self-awareness comes in. We have better ideas. We have heightened perception and different perspective when we allow ourselves to. So a lot to think about there, and a sense of humour too. There's a very mucky, sort of down and dirty sense of humour, and anyone who's followed my work for a while will see that in the way that I draw a line, right through to the way that I write a short story, the way that I talk to the camera if I go on LinkedIn to leave a video, for example. I try not to police myself too much, and that's not to say that I'm going to just suddenly talk to my clients and upset them with toilet humour because that's what me and my brother laugh at. No, it's like I have a good sense of what will work and what should be there and what shouldn't. But within that, apart from those constraints, I'm just simply very happy to have that pattern, that dialogue, and build that relationship. And I find that when you're more authentic and when you're, willing to do that and even make a few mistakes, it really pays off in terms of creating relationships where creativity is enabled, be that somebody commissioning you or the nature of a brief. I think that tribes and communities are really important for self-awareness and self-understanding and appreciation and compassion for yourself. The more time you spend with a broader range of people, the more you get an idea of where you sit within that. And is it real? Is it authentic? Or have you been caught in the maturity trap, which I use in my talks as a way of describing that time of life when we're teenagers and we're a little malleable and we might censor or hide parts of ourselves just to fit in and to be accepted. I think as we get older, to unshackle yourself from that is really, really important, and it particularly shines through in art, music, or writing styles if you can allow yourself, if you have permission to do that. And then there's the value of the negative emotion spectrum. So what traumas have you been through? What troubles have you had? What are you going through? How do you feel about that? Is there a way you could, make work around that or collaborate about a certain topic? Again, great resonance. Andy Cotterill, music photographer, and I did Lend Me Your Ear. We launched it in 2019. But I'd started working on it in 2014, so a 5-year collaboration before we finally did an exhibition, and it was beautiful. I remember Ben Lambert walking in from PB Creative, who would eventually commission me to work on the global packaging rebrand for Lynx and Axe. But that moment doesn't happen if I'd not had the courage to start using my textures as more in the foreground as I got more technically astute in my work. And when he did see it, he came in and he bought a Damon Albarn print, because we both love the guy, love Gorillaz, love Blur, grown up on it, etc., etc. A few weeks later, he comes back with a pitch and we end up working on the biggest commercial job of my career for Lynx and Axe, redesigning the packaging, creating illustrations for about 70 variants, of which I think 44 went to market worldwide. So again, that doesn't happen unless I've put something out there that's full of personality and my curiosity at that moment in time. And I think in that creative process, knowing who you are, knowing your story, having that sense of identity and trust in self enables you to carry out things like ideas and to be perceptive and to have perspective. All of that stuff comes from a column of trust in self and knowing who you are and not being afraid to show that to the world in varying degrees. So it's a bit of a ramble this morning, but I hope that makes some sense. When you're thinking about this now, people, going to ChatGPT to write something and then just bastardizing it. It's like, no, write. Don't be afraid to get a few things wrong. Your grammar might not be perfect. Now, I say this with awareness that neurodivergence, things like dyslexia are an exception to that rule. But if you're able to write the way you write the way you tell a story with your friends, I can guarantee you it will have a kind of resonance that cannot be replicated by an amalgamation from something like ChatGPT. You just won't get there in the same way. So go for the imperfection, allow it to happen, let people see that you are human and allow people to connect with you. Anyway, I hope this makes sense. Like I said, think about things like the maturity trap. Are you behaving in that? Are you releasing? Have you got primal release in your life? Are you exercising your need as a human animal to let off steam? Because all of that, again, helps to inform your self-awareness and your personality and using your story. What are your traumas? What are your highs? Who are the people in your life? How do they inform who you are today? And can you change that for the better? That's enough for me anyway for this week, guys. I hope it makes sense. I just think it's important to consider all this stuff as we make decisions moving forward. Otherwise, there's a grave risk that too many of us get lost to the algorithm and the flattening of culture. If you want a really good read on that, consult the Creative Conditions reading list at thecreativecondition.com and check out Filter World by Kyle Chaker. Really good. Equal parts disturbing and hopeful in terms of this current moment and the sameness of it all. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, illustrationx.com. Check out their global range of illustrator and animator portfolios now. And also consider supporting the Ukrainian Institute, ui.org.ua. Beautiful company supporting the Ukrainian community in this horrific time of war. I hope it's been useful. Feel free to give me your feedback, ben@bentalon.com. If you want to work with me as a creative coach through my pit stop session or something different, longer term maybe, or a shorter 90-minute session, it's all there. It's all up for grabs. Give me a shout. I'll get you a quote. We'll have a call over video to make sure it's right for both of us. Cheers, guys. Have an awesome week, and we'll chat soon.